Hello, and welcome to my channel. This video series is going to discuss the molecules and their interactions relevant to biology, one of the first units in most competitive exams. We'll start this video with structure of molecules and atoms. We have been studying from the lower grades that anything that has mass and occupies space is considered as matter. That is basically the physical material of the universe. And this matter is made up of elements. So all the matter that we see around us is actually made up of different combinations of elements. Elements are pure substances. We'll talk more about these a little later, but these elements are basically pure substances which cannot be decomposed further by chemical reactions. Now when we see elements, the basic particle of an element is an atom. So you could say that the building block of matter itself is atom. Atom is the particle that retains all the properties of the element it is forming a part of. Now, when you have two atoms, they combine together and we get a molecule. I could have the same atom combining with itself, or I could have two or three different atoms that are combining together to form molecules. Either way, they are called as molecules. So this is just a quick gist of what matter is composed of, and the difference between atoms and molecules. Matter can be classified based on several parameters. The first parameter that we are going to look at is the physical state. So based on the physical state, we have four different types of matter. Now, I'm sure you all would have studied about at least three of these in school. That is the solid, liquid, and gaseous state. But we also have a fourth state that we consider, which is the plasma state. Now, why should we know about these states of matter at this stage of our study? Because you should know how the particles are arranged in each of these states. So when we look at a solid state, in the solid state, the particles have a very high level of organization. The particles are packed together tightly. So the whatever particles are present, they are packed together very tightly, and because of this, the solids have a distinct shape, they have a distinct volume. Because of their high level of organization, they don't have much space for movement. On the other hand, when we see liquid particles are able to move around a little bit. So they are still close together, like you can see in this picture. However, they are capable of movement and they move very rapidly. And because of their rapid movement, that's why they are able to slide over one another, and we are able to pour the liquids very easily. So liquids again have a distinct volume, but they do not have a particular shape. They take the shape of the container. Gaseous particles are really far away from each other. They are very they have no fixed volume, so they are able to expand easily. They have no particular shape. They have no attraction between the particles because the particles are so far apart. So there are, you could say, ideally no forces of attraction in a gaseous phase or in a gaseous state. And lastly, we have the plasma. Plasma is again gaseous particles, but these gaseous particles are electrically charged. So whenever we have ionized gas, that is what we call as the plasma. Ionized, or in other words, gaseous phase which has been split into ions, the respective ions and electrons. Why does this happen? This happens when we superheat that particular gas. So when gases are superheated, ultimately after a point they split into ions and electrons, and this is what we call as the plasma phase. So these are the four states of matter, and like we know, we can change one state of matter into the other by either heating or cooling, as shown over here. The other mechanism or the other parameter for dividing matter is based on their composition. What exactly is it made up of? Now, based on what it is made up of, we have pure substances, like I've already mentioned earlier, and we have mixtures. Pure substances are those which have a uniform or a fixed composition. When I say a fixed composition, it means wherever you go in the world, it will have the same composition. Such kind of substances or matters are called as pure substances. So pure substance have a uniform composition, or you could say a constant composition, a fixed composition wherever you go, and it is uniform throughout a sample. Whichever sample you take, whether you take at the top or at the bottom, it would have the same composition. That's what we call as a pure substance. Now, the pure substances are further divided into elements, which we mentioned earlier, and compounds. Elements are made up of only one type of atom, as you all must be already knowing about this. Like I said earlier, this is a revision. This is like our initial step to get into what kind of interactions happen between the atoms and molecules. So elements are made up of only one type of atom. We know, as of now, we know 118 elements, of which 90 or so are found in nature. But of these, because we're talking about the biochemistry and how they're relevant to biology, you should know that we, in our bodies, in living beings, we find only around 25 or so. And even amongst those 25, the most abundant elements that we find are carbon, hydrogen, oxygen, and nitrogen. When we talk about biomolecules, you'll know more about these, how they are arranged, what are the functional groups. We'll talk more about these later. Compounds are those pure substances which are made up of different elements. So I have different elements combining with each other, and that is what gives me a compound. Now, these compounds can be chemically broken down. That's very important, because that's the difference between, a compound and a mixture and an element. Compounds can be chemically, in a chemical reaction, you can break them down to yield the different elements. That's why they're called as compounds, and that's why they're considered as pure substances. On the other hand, we have mixtures. Obviously, if one is pure, mixtures are sort of like impure substances, because mixtures can be separated even by physical methods. So you don't need to necessarily go for chemical reactions. You can separate mixtures by physical methods as well. Now, there are two types of mixtures. We have homogeneous and heterogeneous mixtures. Like the prefix homo means similar, like, same. So homogeneous mixtures are basically having the same composition in a sample. If I give you a glass of salt water, in that glass of salt water, whether I take a sip from the top or whether I take a sip from the bottom, it will have the same composition, it will have the same taste. That's what is called as a homogeneous mixture. So often homogeneous mixtures are also referred to as solutions. Solutions are, one of the most common types of homogeneous mixtures. Homogeneous mixtures would have the same composition, uniform composition throughout the sample. Then why do we not call it as a compound? Because when I make a glass of salt water, I could be adding, say, 1 teaspoon of salt into 1 glass of water or 100 ml of water. If I ask you to prepare salt water, you could make the same salt water with, say, 1 tablespoon of salt in 100 ml of water. So it's not fixed. Salt water doesn't remain the same wherever we go. It changes. It has the same ingredients, but the composition, how much of it is added, is different. That's why salt water or homogeneous solutions are mixtures and they're not compounds. Heterogeneous mixtures are like the prefix hetero means. Hetero is something which is, different or variety. So heterogeneous mixtures do not have a uniform composition even in a sample. So even if I give you a sample of, say, I mix, say, salt and iron powder, when I take a spoonful, the first spoonful might have more of salt and less of iron powder. The second spoonful I take might have more of iron powder and less of salt. So even within a sample, it's not distributed uniformly. There is difference in the composition, and that's called as a heterogeneous mixture, like sand and water or smog, for examples from the environmental science, or even, like I said, salt and sand, salt and iron powder. All of these are examples of heterogeneous mixtures. So what we need to take away from this is that whatever kind of matter you take, whatever kind of matter you talk about, whether you talk about pure substance, whether it is the element, compound, mixture, all of these are made up of combinations of elements, combinations of atoms, because atom is like the basic particle of an element of any matter. So let's talk about atoms more in detail. Now the atoms for that matter, the elements are all arranged in a table, in a tabular format that is shown over here, which is called as a periodic table. I'm sure all of you have known about this from your studies in biology and in chemistry. So this is the periodic table which gives you or lists out all of the elements in a particular order. Now this periodic, in the periodic table, the rows are called as periods. For those of you who have forgotten, the rows are called as periods, and the vertical columns are called as groups. The rows are called as periods and the vertical columns are called as groups. So as we go ahead, we'll see that, how the periodic table is actually important for us to predict the valency, to predict the number of electrons. All of that helps, it the help comes from the periodic table, the way the elements are arranged. So just keep this in mind. We'll revisit this again later, that the horizontal rows are called as periods and the vertical columns are called as groups. Right. So when we see the structure of an atom, we know that atom is made up of subatomic particles, basically particles which are present inside an atom. So these subatomic particles, the basic particles that we know of, are the ones that I've listed over here. That's the proton, neutron, and electron. If you see the current research, there are many more names that or terminologies that you'll come up with. Like you have quarks that you'll come up, and then again under that you have different types. But generally, at least for the competitive exams, the most basic nature of atom is considered of protons, neutrons, and electrons. Protons are the positively charged particles. Neutrons are the neutral particles which are not having any charge, so they are neutral in nature, and electrons have a negative charge on them. The protons and neutrons together, because they reside inside the nucleus of the atom, nucleus is the central core of the atom, because protons and neutrons are present inside the nucleus, these particles together are also called as the nucleons. So nucleons are the ones which carry most of the atom's mass. And electrons, like we know, are present in discrete regions around the nucleus. So they are present in regions around the nucleus, and these regions or these levels, energy levels, are called as shells. So we have different naming of the shells, like we have K shell, L, M, N, and so on. So shells are named as K, L, M, N. Each shell will further have many subshells. So subshells are given the terms like S, P, D, and F subshell. I'm sure you've heard about all of these in chemistry. And then the subshells each would have further orbitals in them. All of these are basically regions where you have most probability of finding the electrons. So electrons are moving around the nucleus, but the region where you have maximum probability, those are called as the orbitals, and the larger regions are called as subshells, and finally the shells. So orbitals again are different in number. For example, S subshell has only one orbital, or P subshell is known to have 3 orbitals under them. D subshell is known to have 5, and the F subshell is known to have 7 orbitals in it. So under each subshell we have multiple number of orbitals which can hold different numbers of electrons. That's where the orbitals and the electrons and all of that comes about. So like I showed you the periodic table in the previous slide, in the periodic table, the group number, that is the vertical column, the group number actually helps us because it tells us the number of valence electrons that are present in an atom. So all the atoms or all the elements that are there in a particular group, all of them, that is all the atoms which are one, or elements which are one below the other, all of them would have the same number of valence electrons. Now what are valence electrons? Valence electrons are the outermost electrons. So all the elements that you see from top to bottom of a particular group, they all have the same number of valence electrons. For example, if the group is 1, they will all have 1 valence electron or 1 outermost electron. If the group is, if we are talking about the second group, then they would have 2 valence electrons, so on and so forth. The period number is the horizontal rows. The period number actually tells you the number of shells that are there, that are filling up in that particular element. So in a particular row, you have the same shell getting filled up. The electrons are all moving in and occupying space within the same shell. So these are certain tricks that will help you to actually find out the answers for many of the multiple choice questions that we'll discuss. Now, when we see the subatomic particles, this is just to sum it up. You have the charges. You should know what are the charges that are present on each of the subatomic particles. They carry some mass. So if you see over here, protons and neutrons are the ones which have or which account for most of the mass in an atom. Electrons have negligible mass, so we usually don't take the masses of electrons. Now, if you see here in grams, these values are really tiny. So for ease of calculation, instead of grams, we use the abbreviation, or we use the unit that's abbreviated as AMU. AMU stands for atomic mass unit. We'll talk more about this in the upcoming videos, but you should know that atomic mass unit is the unit that is taken into account for whenever we talk about the subatomic particles. So if you see here, protons have an atomic mass unit that equals almost 1. Even neutrons are equaling almost 1. Approximately they are equal to 1 atomic mass unit, whereas electrons are equal to, you could say, 0, almost 0, negligible. They do not have any mass at all. That is how they are considered. So most of the mass of the atom is residing inside the nucleus, which is the central part of the atom. And inside the nucleus, we know what we have. We have the protons and the neutrons. So they are the ones which take up the most of the mass of the atom. Now, the electronic structure of an atom, the how it is shaped, or how many electrons are there in the outermost shell, totally how many electrons are there, all of that electronic structure, the electronic configuration, especially the valence electrons or the outermost electrons, they decide the chemical properties of an element. That is why when we see a group which is having the same number of valence electrons, like I said, in a group, the number of valence electrons would be same. So in a group, when we see, we can actually predict the chemical properties because all of them have the same number of valence electrons. So if I'm talking about group 2, then all of them have 2 valence electrons, and I know exactly how they're going to react or how they're going to behave in a chemical reaction. So the chemical properties are mainly decided by the electrons, especially the outermost valence electrons. Subatomic particles in any element is designated in this manner. So we have the symbol of the element that is written, and then at the bottom we usually write the atomic number. Atomic number equals the number of protons, or it could also equal the number of electrons, because in any neutral atom, the net charge on the atom is 0. So if it has to be 0, then I should have equal positive and negative charges, or in other words, I should have equal protons and equal electrons. Only then they'll cancel out and give me the charge 0. So atomic number can be given by either the number of protons or the number of electrons in any element. So usually we talk about the protons because you can play around with electrons in a chemical reaction. Protons are difficult to remove. The mass number, which is written at the top as a superscript, is the sum of the protons and the neutrons, or in other words, it is equal to the total number of nucleons in that element. That would give you the mass number. Mass number is not equal to the atomic mass. It's not equal to the weight. We'll talk about how that's different. But this is the mass number. It's almost equal. We'll see later that it's almost equal. But mass number is the number of protons with the number of neutrons. And atomic number is just the number of protons. This is how the symbol is written. Now, there are some entities or moieties also called as isotopes. Isotopes are the same element of, like I have given the example over here, all of are isotopes of carbon. So the element is still carbon, but they are different, or they are labeled differently because they have different number of neutrons. So the protons remain the same, the electrons remain the same. However, the number of neutrons changes. And because the number of neutrons changes, obviously the mass number is also going to change. That is what is changing, because mass number equals the number of protons and the neutrons. So if you see over here, I have shown it as C11, C12, C13 and C14. What is the number that's changing over here? It's the mass number. Why? Because protons remain the same. It's 6. Electrons have to remain the same. It has to be 6 because I need a neutral atom. But if you see the number of neutrons, it changes from 5 to 6 to 7 to 8. That is why the symbol is written in a different way. So isotopes are, entities, or they are different forms of the same element. They are nearly identical chemical properties because electrons remain the same, but they do differ in their physical properties because their mass number is changed. Now, they have a lot of scientific applications. This is something that you should know about. Scientific applications are aplenty for isotopes. They are used in medical research, where we use isotopes like zinc 65 or iron 55. So it is used a lot in medical field. For a lot of medical research, we tend to use isotopes. We use isotopes in diagnostic imaging. So, where we need to, like some of the examples given here in the tabular column, we use it when we have to do, use radioactive isotopes that can be actually used to visualize how a disease progresses or where exactly which organ is affected. All of that can be done by using radioactive isotopes. And we also use in cancer therapy. Cancer therapy also in fact employs isotopes. There's something called as gamma knife surgery, where we use gamma emitting isotopes to target a particular cell. Why do we use it in cancer therapy? Because they are used we use mechanisms to deliver these highly targeted radiations just to the cancerous cells and not to the surrounding tissues. So we are trying to kill the cancerous cells by using these isotopes. We use alpha particle emitters like At211. We use beta emitters like copper 67. We use gamma emitters like cobalt 60. So all of these are some of the applications of scientific applications of isotopes, apart from the normal ones that we do know about, which is in the nuclear reactors. We use it in the industry. So apart from these, the isotope applications that I've listed are more with relation to the biological field. With that, we have come to the end of this video, where we had a quick recap of matter, the different classification of matter, atoms, molecules, the structure of atoms, and isotopes. In the next video, please do join in to know more about the different types of chemical bonds, and I'll also tell you how you can differentiate between polar and non-polar covalent bonds. I hope to see you all. Bye.